Have you ever walked away from a conversation replaying every word you said and cringing? That moment when your heart pounds in your chest. You try to sound natural, but your mind is screaming with self-doubt. Did I just say something stupid? Why did I say that? Why can't I just be normal like everyone else? Or maybe you don't say anything at all. You sit there, smiling, nodding, but inside, you're disconnected, awkward, watching the world talk around you like you're a ghost in the room. And after it's over, you retreat back into silence. You replay the moments on loop. You analyze, overthink, criticize. You tell yourself, next time I'll do better. But next time, it happens again. If this is you, I want you to hear this. You are not alone. Shyness, anxiety, social awkwardness. These are not flaws. They are signs, signals that your emotional world is asking to be understood. You're not broken. You've just never been taught how to listen to your emotions, how to navigate them, how to use them. That's what emotional intelligence is. And the best part? It's learnable. You don't need to be the loudest person in the room. You don't need to fake confidence or memorize one-liners from self-help books. What you do need is self-awareness, emotional control, the ability to connect, not just with others, but with yourself. Because once you understand your emotions, once you learn how to regulate your reactions and read people clearly, the world starts to feel a lot less scary. Social skills aren't about being perfect. They're about being present. They're about building trust, creating real connections, and finally feeling seen. In the chapters ahead, we're going to explore the root of social anxiety, break the myth of natural charisma, and show you you'll learn how to recognize your triggers, set healthy boundaries, and build the kind of calm, quiet confidence that doesn't shout but is unshakable. This audiobook isn't just information, it's a transformation. And you don't have to do it alone. I've been there. The awkwardness, the emotional spirals, the fear of being misunderstood. But I've also discovered what's on the other side. A version of you that's capable, composed, and deeply connected. So if you're ready, let's begin this journey together. The foundation of emotional intelligence. Welcome to How to Master Emotional Intelligence and Social Skills. I'm so glad you've decided to join me on this transformative journey. If you're listening to this, chances are you felt that familiar knot in your stomach before walking into a room full of people. Or maybe you've replayed a conversation in your head, wondering if you said the right thing. Perhaps you've watched others navigate social situations with what seems like effortless grace, while you feel like you're speaking a foreign language. Here's what I want you to know right from the start. You're not broken, you're not weird, and you're definitely not alone. What you're experiencing is incredibly common, and more importantly, it's completely changeable. The skills we're going to explore together aren't just theoretical concepts. They're practical, learnable abilities that can transform how you show up in the world. Over the next several parts of this audiobook, we're going to dive deep into the world of emotional intelligence, or EQ, as it's often called. We'll explore how understanding and managing your emotions can dramatically improve your relationships, your career, and your overall quality of life. But today, in part 1, We're laying the foundation. We're going to understand why so many of us struggle socially, build your emotional awareness, and introduce you to the 5 core components that make up emotional intelligence. So find a comfortable spot, maybe grab a cup of coffee or tea, and let's begin this journey together. Understanding the shyness trap. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah is a brilliant software engineer. She can solve complex coding problems that would make most people's heads spin. She's incredibly creative, and she has a genuine heart for helping others. But put Sarah in a networking event or team meeting, and she becomes a completely different person. She'll stand in the corner, checking her phone, hoping no one notices her. When someone does approach her, she gives short, polite replies, polite answers, and finds the first excuse to escape to the bathroom or step outside for fresh air. Sarah once told me, "I just don't have the social gene. Some people are naturally good with people, and some aren't. I'm one of the aren'ts." Does this sound familiar? Maybe you've said something similar to yourself. Here's the thing, though. Sarah was operating under one of the biggest myths about social skills and emotional intelligence, that these abilities are fixed traits you're either born with or without. The truth is, what we often call shyness isn't actually a personality flaw or genetic limitation. It's typically a learned response pattern that developed over time, usually as a way to protect ourselves from perceived social threats. Let me explain what I mean. Think about a time when you were young. Maybe you raised your hand in class to answer a question, got it wrong, and some kids laughed. Or perhaps you tried to join a group at lunch and they ignored you or told you to go away. In that moment, your brain did what brains do best. It created a protective mechanism. It said, social situations can be dangerous. People might reject us, embarrass us, or hurt us. Let's be more careful next time. This is actually a brilliant survival mechanism. The problem is, our brains often can't distinguish between real social threats and perceived ones, or between past situations and present ones. So that protective mechanism that kept you safe in 4th grade might still be running the show when you're trying to give a presentation at work or make friends as an adult. Here's what's really happening in what I call the shyness trap. Your brain interprets social situations as potentially threatening, which triggers your fight, flight, or freeze response. For most shy people, it's freeze. Your heart starts racing, your mind goes blank, your palms get sweaty, and you either avoid the situation entirely or get through it while feeling like you're barely surviving. But here's the revolutionary part. Once you understand that shyness is not a fixed personality trait, but rather a learned response pattern, you realize it can be unlearned and replaced with more helpful patterns. Let me share another story. David came to one of my workshops 3 years ago. He was so anxious about social situations that he had turned down 3 job promotions because they would have required him to lead meetings and present to clients. He genuinely believed he was just not a people person, and that nothing could change that. David started by simply observing his own emotional patterns. When did the anxiety spike? What thoughts were running through his head? What physical sensations did he notice? He discovered that his anxiety wasn't actually about the people or the situation itself. It was about his fear of being judged as incompetent. Once David identified this core fear, he could start working with it. He practiced small interactions with low stakes. He joined a local hobby group where the focus was on the activity, not on socializing. He learned breathing techniques to manage his physical anxiety responses. Most importantly, he began to challenge the story his brain was telling him about social situations. Today, David is a regional manager who regularly speaks at industry conferences. Did his personality change? No. Did he learn new skills and create new neural pathways that serve him better? Absolutely. The shyness trap isn't really about shyness at all. It's about emotional patterns that haven't been examined or updated. And that's where emotional intelligence comes in. When you develop your EQ, you're essentially becoming the software engineer of your own emotional responses. You learn to debug the programs that aren't serving you and install new ones that do. This is why I'm so passionate about this work. Every person I've worked with who felt trapped by shyness or social anxiety has been able to make significant improvements once they understood that their current patterns were learned and therefore could be unlearned. The journey we're on together isn't about turning you into someone you're not. It's about removing the barriers that prevent you from being who you already are. Building self-awareness and emotional foundations. Now that we understand that our emotional and social patterns are changeable, let's talk about where all meaningful change begins. Self-awareness. Self-awareness is like being the narrator of your own life story. Instead of just living your experiences, you're also observing them. You notice what you're feeling, thinking, and doing, and you begin to see the connections between these elements. Most people go through life on emotional autopilot. Something happens, they react, and they move on without ever examining the process. But when you develop self-awareness, you begin to see the space between stimulus and response. In that space lies your power to choose. Let me give you a concrete example. Lisa works in marketing, and she noticed that every time her boss called her into his office, she would feel physically sick to her stomach. She would spend the entire meeting tense and defensive, and afterwards, she would replay every word, convinced she was about to be fired. When Lisa started developing self-awareness, she began to notice this pattern. She realized that the physical sensation in her stomach was actually fear, and the fear was based on a story she was telling herself. When authority figures want to talk to me privately, it means I'm in trouble. But here's what's fascinating. When Lisa traced this pattern back, she realized it started when she was 7 years old. Her father was very critical, and whenever he called her into his study for a private talk, it meant she was about to be lectured or punished. Her brain had generalized this childhood experience to all interactions with authority figures. Once Lisa became aware of this pattern, she could start working with it consciously. She could remind herself, "This is my boss, not my father. This is work, not childhood." After a week, look for patterns. You might notice that you feel anxious every time someone doesn't respond to your text messages immediately, or angry when people interrupt you, or inadequate when others talk about their achievements. The second element of building self-awareness is understanding your limiting beliefs. These are the unconscious assumptions you have about yourself, others, and how the world works. They often sound like, "I'm not smart enough." "People don't really like me." "If I speak up, I'll say something stupid." Or, successful people are just naturally confident. These beliefs feel true because they've been reinforced over time, but they're actually just stories based on past experiences. And stories can be rewritten. Here's a powerful question to help identify limiting beliefs. What would I do if I knew I couldn't fail and no one would judge me? The gap between that answer and what you actually do reveals where limiting beliefs might be holding you back. The third component of self-awareness is recognizing your behavioral patterns. We all have default ways of responding to different situations. Some people withdraw when they feel overwhelmed. Others become aggressive. Some try to please everyone, and others shut down emotionally. These patterns developed for good reasons. They helped you cope with difficult situations in the past, but they might not be serving you well in your current life. For example, Marcus realized that whenever he felt criticized at work, he would immediately start making jokes and trying to make everyone laugh. This pattern had served him well in high school, when humor helped him deflect bullying. But in professional settings, it was undermining his credibility and making people take him less seriously. Building self-awareness is like developing a muscle. It gets stronger with practice. The more you observe yourself with curiosity rather than judgment, the clearer your patterns become. And the clearer your patterns become, the more choice you have in how you respond to life's challenges. Remember, the goal isn't to judge yourself harshly for your patterns, or to try to eliminate all emotional reactions. Emotions are valuable information. The goal is to understand your emotional landscape so well that you can navigate it skillfully. Learning emotional control and resilience. Let's clear up a common misconception right away. Emotional control doesn't mean suppressing your emotions or pretending you don't feel them. That's actually emotional suppression, and it's one of the least healthy things you can do with your emotions. True emotional regulation means feeling your emotions fully while choosing how to express and act on them. Think of emotions like weather. You wouldn't try to stop a thunderstorm, but you would choose appropriate clothing and decide whether to go outside. Emotional regulation is about learning to dance with your emotions rather than being swept away by them. Let me tell you about James, a project manager who used to be known for his explosive temper. When deadlines were missed or team members made mistakes, James would lose it. He'd raise his voice, send harsh emails, and sometimes storm out of meetings. Afterward, he'd feel terrible and apologize. But the damage to his relationships and reputation was accumulating. James thought his anger was just part of his personality. "I'm passionate about quality work," he'd say. "Sometimes that means getting intense." But what James discovered through developing emotional intelligence was that his anger was actually a secondary emotion. Underneath it was fear. Fear that the project would fail, that he'd look incompetent, that his team would lose respect for him. Once James understood this, he could start working with the fear directly instead of expressing it as anger. When he felt that familiar surge of frustration building, he learned to pause and ask himself, what am I actually afraid of right now? This simple question created space between the trigger and his reaction. James also developed what I call an emotional toolkit, a set of strategies he could use when he felt overwhelmed. His toolkit included deep breathing exercises, a quick walk around the building, and a practice of writing out his concerns before addressing them with his team. The result? James is still passionate about quality work, but now he channels that passion in ways that inspire his team rather than intimidate them. His projects run more smoothly because team members feel safe bringing up problems early instead of hiding them out of fear. This brings us to one of the most important skills in emotional regulation, the pause. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space lies your freedom. The pause can be as short as a single breath or as long as a day to sleep on a decision. The key is remembering that you have the pause available to you. Here are some practical techniques for emotional regulation that you can start using immediately. The 4-7-8 breathing technique. When you feel overwhelmed, breathe in for a count of 4, hold for 7, and exhale for 8. This activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which helps calm your body's stress response. The counting also gives your mind something to focus on, besides whatever triggered you. The name it to tame it method. Research shows that simply labeling your emotions reduces their intensity. Instead of saying, "I feel bad," get specific. I feel disappointed and worried about how this will affect my reputation. The more precisely you can name what you're feeling, the more control you have over it. The reframe exercise. Ask yourself, what else could this mean? If someone doesn't respond to your email, instead of assuming they're ignoring you, consider other possibilities. They're busy. They're thinking about their response. They didn't see it. Or they're dealing with something urgent. The body scan. Strong emotions always have physical components. Anger might show up as tension in your jaw or shoulders. Anxiety might manifest as a tight chest or churning stomach. By scanning your body regularly, you can catch emotional reactions early, before they build to overwhelming levels. Now let's talk about resilience. Resilience isn't about being tough or unfeeling. It's about your ability to bounce back from setbacks and adapt to challenges. It's like being a palm tree in a hurricane. You bend with the wind, but don't break. Resilient people aren't immune to stress, disappointment, or failure. They just have better recovery strategies. They've learned that setbacks are temporary and that they have the resources to handle whatever life throws at them. One of the key components of resilience is what psychologists call cognitive flexibility, the ability to adapt your thinking when circumstances change. Less resilient people tend to get stuck in rigid thinking patterns. This always happens to me. I'm terrible at this. Nothing ever works out. Resilient people, on the other hand, ask better questions. What can I learn from this? How might this setback actually redirect me towards something better? What resources do I have that I haven't considered yet? Here's a story that illustrates this beautifully. Maria had worked at the same company for 8 years when she was laid off during a restructuring. Her initial reaction was devastation. She felt like a failure and worried she'd never find another job. But Maria had been working on her emotional intelligence, so she gave herself permission to feel the disappointment fully for a few days, then shifted into problem-solving mode. She used the layoff as an opportunity to reassess her career goals. She realized she'd been staying in her job out of comfort, not passion. Maria spent her unemployment period taking online courses, networking in new industries, and exploring freelance opportunities. 6 months later, she landed a position at a startup that paid more than her previous job and aligned much better with her values and interests. "Getting laid off was the best thing that happened to my career," Maria told me later. "I just couldn't see it at the time." This is the essence of resilience, the ability to find meaning and opportunity within difficulty. Building resilience is like building physical fitness. It requires regular practice. Here are some ways to strengthen your resilience muscle. Develop a growth mindset. Instead of seeing challenges as threats to your competence, see them as opportunities to grow. Every difficulty you overcome makes you more capable of handling future challenges. Build your support network. Resilient people don't go it alone. They cultivate relationships with people who can offer emotional support, practical help, and different perspectives during tough times. Practice self-compassion. Treat yourself with the same kindness you'd show a good friend going through a difficult time. Self-criticism weakens resilience, while self-compassion strengthens it. Maintain perspective. This too shall pass. The situation that feels overwhelming today will likely be much less significant a year from now. Ask yourself, will this matter in 5 years? Remember, emotional regulation and resilience are skills, not talents. They improve with practice. Every time you pause before reacting, every time you choose a helpful thought over a destructive one, every time you bounce back from a setback a little faster than before, you're building these crucial abilities. Breaking down the 5 core components of EQ. Now that we've built a foundation of understanding around emotional patterns and regulation, let's dive into the 5 core components that make up emotional intelligence. Think of these as the 5 pillars that support your EQ house. Each one is important on its own, but together they create a strong, stable structure for navigating life's challenges and opportunities. 1. Self-awareness. We've already touched on self-awareness, but let's go deeper. Self-awareness is your ability to recognize and understand your own emotions, strengths, weaknesses, values, and motivations. It's like having a high-quality internal monitoring system that gives you real-time feedback about your emotional state. People with strong self-awareness can accurately assess their capabilities without being overly modest or grandiose. They know what situations energize them and which ones drain them. They understand their triggers and can predict how they're likely to react in different scenarios. Let me tell you about Emma, a talented graphic designer who struggled with self-awareness early in her career. Emma would take on every project that came her way, saying yes to tight deadlines and demanding clients, without considering whether she had the bandwidths or whether the project aligned with her strengths. The result was predictable. Emma was constantly stressed, her work quality suffered, and she began to resent her clients and her career. She couldn't understand why she felt so miserable doing work she was supposedly passionate about. Through developing self-awareness, Emma realized several important things about herself. First, she was highly creative but needed uninterrupted time to do her best work. Second, she was motivated by projects that allowed her to solve interesting visual problems, not by routine design tasks. Third, she was a people pleaser who had difficulty setting boundaries. Armed with this self-knowledge, Emma was able to restructure her business. She began specializing in complex branding projects for startups, which played to her creative strengths. She established clear boundaries around her work hours and communication with clients. She raised her rates and took on fewer projects, which paradoxically increased both her income and her satisfaction. "I spent years fighting against my own nature," Emma told me. "Once I understood how I actually work best, everything became easier." To develop self-awareness, try this exercise. At the end of each day, ask yourself 3 questions. What did I feel most energized by today? What drained my energy? What triggered strong emotions in me? And why might that be? Self-regulation. Self-regulation is your ability to manage your emotions, impulses, and behaviors in healthy ways. It's not about suppressing emotions, but about choosing how to express them appropriately for the situation. People with strong self-regulation can stay calm under pressure, think before they speak, and recover quickly from emotional setbacks. They're also able to delay gratification when it serves their long-term goals. Consider Tom, a sales manager who used to struggle with self-regulation. When prospects said no or deals fell through, Tom would immediately start making excuses or arguing with the potential customer. His emotional reactions were driving away business and damaging his reputation. Tom learned to pause when he felt that surge of defensiveness. Instead of reacting immediately, he would take a deep breath and ask himself, what response would be most helpful right now? Often, that meant acknowledging the prospect's concerns, asking clarifying questions, or simply accepting the no gracefully and leaving the door open for future opportunities. This shift in approach transformed Tom's results. Prospects began to see him as consultative rather than pushy. Even when deals didn't close immediately, people remembered Tom positively and often referred him to others, or came back to him later when their situations changed. To strengthen self-regulation, practice the stop technique. Stop what you're doing. Take a breath. Observe what you're feeling and thinking, and proceed with intention rather than impulse. 3. Motivation. In the context of emotional intelligence, motivation refers to your inner drive to achieve goals for personal satisfaction rather than external rewards. It's about being motivated by the joy of learning, the satisfaction of accomplishment, and the desire to improve, rather than just money, status, or approval from others. People with strong intrinsic motivation are more resilient because their satisfaction doesn't depend entirely on external circumstances. They find meaning in the process, not just the outcome. Sarah, a marketing director, discovered the power of intrinsic motivation when she shifted her focus from impressing her boss to becoming genuinely excellent at her craft. Instead of choosing projects based on what would look good on her performance review, she began choosing projects that would stretch her skills and create meaningful value for her company's customers. This shift didn't go unnoticed. Sarah's work became more creative and effective because she was fully engaged rather than just going through the motions. Ironically, by focusing less on external approval, she received more recognition than ever before. To develop intrinsic motivation, regularly ask yourself, what aspects of this work or situation genuinely interest me? How can I approach this in a way that helps me grow? What impact am I trying to create? 4. Empathy. Empathy is your ability to understand and share the feelings of others. It's not just about being sympathetic. It's about actually tuning into other people's emotional experiences and perspectives. There are different types of empathy. Cognitive empathy is understanding intellectually how someone else feels. Emotional empathy is actually feeling what they feel. Compassionate empathy is understanding and feeling what someone else experiences and being moved to help if needed. Empathy is crucial for building strong relationships because it allows you to connect with others authentically. When people feel understood, they're more likely to trust you, collaborate with you, and support you. Let me share a story about Kevin, an IT director who initially struggled with empathy. When team members came to him with problems, Kevin would immediately jump into problem-solving mode. He'd offer technical solutions without acknowledging the frustration or stress his team members were experiencing. Kevin couldn't understand why his team seemed demoralized despite his efforts to help them. Through feedback and coaching, Kevin learned to lead with empathy before moving to solutions. When someone brought him a problem, he would first acknowledge their feelings. That sounds really frustrating. It makes sense that you'd be stressed about the deadline. This simple shift transformed Kevin's relationships with his team. People felt heard and understood, which made them more receptive to his technical guidance. Team morale improved and productivity actually increased because people were less defensive and more collaborative. To develop empathy, practice active listening. When someone is sharing something with you, resist the urge to immediately offer advice or share your own similar experience. Instead, focus completely on understanding their perspective. Ask questions like, "How did that make you feel?" or "What was that experience like for you?" 5. Social skills. Social skills encompass your ability to communicate effectively, manage relationships, work well in teams, and influence others in positive ways. This includes skills like active listening, clear communication, conflict resolution, and collaboration. They're able to navigate workplace politics without compromising their integrity and can inspire and motivate others. Rachel, a project coordinator, exemplifies strong social skills. When she started working with a new team that had a history of conflict and missed deadlines, Rachel didn't try to impose her will or criticize past performance. Instead, she took time to understand each team member's working style, concerns, and motivations. Rachel discovered that the conflict was largely due to poor communication and unclear expectations. She implemented regular check-ins, created shared documentation systems, and established clear protocols for decision-making. More importantly, She made sure every team member felt heard and valued. Within 3 months, the team was not only meeting their deadlines, but exceeding their goals. The change wasn't due to new technical skills or resources. It was due to improved social dynamics that allowed the team to collaborate effectively. To develop social skills, pay attention to both verbal and nonverbal communication. Notice how your words, tone, and body language affect others. Practice adapting your communication style to different people. Some people prefer direct communication, others need more context and relationship building. The beautiful thing about these 5 components is that they're interconnected. As you develop self-awareness, self-regulation becomes easier. As you strengthen empathy, your social skills naturally improve. As you build intrinsic motivation, you become more resilient and better able to regulate your emotions. Remember, developing emotional intelligence is not about perfection. It's about progress. Every small improvement in any of these areas will have ripple effects throughout your personal and professional life. End of part reflective exercise and takeaway action plan. We've covered a lot of ground together in this first part. You've learned that social struggles aren't fixed personality traits, but changeable patterns. You've discovered the importance of self-awareness as the foundation of emotional intelligence. You've explored emotional regulation and resilience, and you've been introduced to the 5 core components of EQ. Now comes the most important part: taking action. Knowledge without application is just entertainment. The insights you've gained today will only create lasting change if you put them into practice. Let's start with a reflective exercise. I want you to find a quiet space where you can think without interruption. If you're walking or driving while listening to this, come back to this exercise later when you can give it your full attention. Reflective questions. First, think about the stories I've shared. Sarah, the software engineer; David, who avoided promotions; Lisa, who feared her boss; James with his anger; Emma, the graphic designer. Which of these stories resonated most with you? What similarities do you see between their experiences and your own? Second, consider your own emotional patterns. What situations consistently trigger strong reactions in you? What do these triggers tell you about your underlying fears or needs? Remember, there's no judgment here, just curiosity. Third, think about the 5 components of emotional intelligence: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. If you had to rank them from strongest to weakest in your current life, how would you order them? Which one, if you developed it further, would have the biggest positive impact on your life? Finally, reflect on this question: what would become possible in my life if I felt confident and comfortable in social situations? Don't censor yourself. Let your imagination run free. What relationships might you build? What opportunities might you pursue? What version of yourself might emerge? Now, let's create your action plan. Change happens through consistent, small actions, not dramatic one-time efforts. Here are 5 simple practices you can implement this week. Action Step 1. Start an emotion journal. For the next 7 days, spend 5 minutes each evening writing about your emotional experiences. What did you feel strongly about today? What triggered those feelings? What thoughts went through your mind? Don't analyze or judge. Just observe and record. This builds self-awareness. Action step 2. Practice the pause. Choose one common trigger situation in your life. Maybe it's receiving criticism, being interrupted, or feeling left out. Action step 3. Ask one empathy question daily. Once each day, ask someone how they're really doing and listen to their full answer without immediately sharing your own experience or offering advice. Practice understanding their perspective. This builds empathy. Action step 4. Identify your energy patterns. Pay attention to what activities, people, and situations give you energy versus what drains you. Notice, without trying to change anything yet. Just gather information. This builds self-awareness and helps you understand your intrinsic motivations. Action step 5. Practice one small social risk. Each day this week, take one small social risk that feels slightly outside your comfort zone. This might be saying hello to a neighbor, asking a question in a meeting, or initiating a conversation with a colleague. Start small and build gradually. This develops social skills and confidence. Remember, the goal isn't perfection, it's progress. If you miss a day or find one of these practices challenging, that's completely normal. Just start again the next day. Every small step forward is building new neural pathways that will serve you for the rest of your life. Part 2. Practical social skills rooted in emotional intelligence. You've already done the essential work, understanding yourself, recognizing emotional patterns, and laying the groundwork for meaningful relationships. Now it's about applying that understanding in the real world. This is the transition from self-awareness to social awareness, from managing your own emotions to sensing and responding to the emotions of others with empathy and skill. Earlier, it was like learning to drive in an empty parking lot, getting familiar with the controls and building confidence. Now, you're merging onto a busy highway. This is where the real growth shows up, where your internal development begins to shape your external interactions. You'll gain a set of practical tools you can start using right away, whether you're entering a networking event, navigating a tough conversation, or trying to connect with someone who feels out of reach. And here's what's important. These are not surface-level tricks. They are rooted in genuine emotional intelligence. Using them means forming real, lasting connections, something most people never truly master. Let's begin. 1. Enhancing empathy and social perception. Let me start with a story that perfectly illustrates the power of empathy in action. Rachel works as a customer service manager at a tech company. Last month, she received a call from a customer named Michael, who was absolutely furious. His software had crashed during a crucial presentation to his biggest client, and he was demanding a full refund and threatening to leave negative reviews everywhere. Now, Rachel's colleagues would typically handle this by immediately going into damage control mode, offering technical solutions, discounts, or explaining company policy. But Rachel had been developing her emotional intelligence, so she did something different. Instead of jumping straight to solutions, Rachel tuned in to what Michael was really experiencing beneath his anger. She listened not just to his words, but to the exhaustion in his voice, the slight tremor that suggested he was more scared than angry, the way he kept mentioning his client and his reputation. "Michael," Rachel said gently, "it sounds like this couldn't have happened at a worse time. You must have been mortified, standing there in front of your biggest client when the software failed. That would be my worst nightmare." There was a pause. Then Michael's voice completely changed. "Yes," he said quietly. "I felt like such an amateur. I've been trying to land this client for 2 years." That moment of genuine empathy transformed the entire conversation. Instead of an adversarial negotiation, it became a collaborative problem-solving session. Rachel not only solved Michael's technical issue, but also helped him craft an email to his client that actually strengthened their relationship by showing vulnerability and commitment to excellence. This is empathy in action, the ability to step into someone else's emotional world and understand not just what they're saying, but what they're experiencing. But empathy isn't just about being nice or sympathetic. It's actually a sophisticated form of emotional intelligence that involves 3 distinct levels. Cognitive empathy is understanding intellectually how someone else feels. You can recognize that your friend is sad about their breakup, even if you've never been through a similar experience. Emotional empathy is actually feeling what another person feels. When you watch someone get rejected and you feel that familiar knot in your stomach, that's emotional empathy. Compassionate empathy combines understanding and feeling with the motivation to help. You not only get what someone is going through, but you're moved to take action to support them. The most socially intelligent people can access all 3 levels as appropriate to the situation. Now, here's where it gets interesting from a neuroscience perspective. Research by Dr. Marco Iacobi at UCLA has shown that we have what are called mirror neurons, brain cells that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing that same action. These neurons are part of what allows us to understand and empathize with others. But here's the key. These mirror neurons can be strengthened through practice. The more you consciously practice tuning into others' emotional states, the better you become at ... So how do you develop this social superpower? First, practice perspective taking. When someone is sharing something with you, don't just listen to their words. Try to imagine what it would feel like to be in their situation. What would you be worried about? What would you need in that moment? Let me give you a workplace example. Your colleague Janet mentions she's been working late every night this week. Instead of just saying, "That's rough," and moving on, practice perspective taking. What might it feel like to be overwhelmed with work? Maybe she's stressed about letting people down, worried about her performance review, or frustrated that she's missing time with her family. With this understanding, you can respond more empathetically. That sounds really stressful. Are you feeling overwhelmed? Or is it more that you're worried about getting everything done on time? Second, develop what I call emotional curiosity. Instead of making assumptions about why people are acting the way they are, get genuinely curious about their inner experience. If your normally cheerful neighbor seems distant, instead of thinking they're being rude, try wondering, I wonder what they're going through that's making it hard to connect right now. This shift from judgment to curiosity is transformational for relationships. Third, practice reflective responses. This is a technique where you reflect back, not just what someone said, but what you sense they're feeling. For example, if your friend says, I can't believe I didn't get that promotion. I worked so hard for it. Instead of immediately offering advice or reassurance, you might say, it sounds like you're feeling really disappointed and maybe questioning whether your efforts are being recognized. This does two powerful things. It shows the person that you're really listening, and it helps them feel understood at an emotional level. Period. Here's a family example of empathy in action. 16-year-old Alex comes home from school and immediately goes to their room, slamming the door. Their parent, Tom, has two choices. He can get frustrated about the attitude and knock on the door to lecture Alex about respect, or he can practice empathy. Tom chooses empathy. He knocks gently and says, Hey, it seems like you had a rough day. I'm here if you want to talk. No judgment, no demands, just acknowledgement and availability. 20 minutes later, Alex comes out and shares that they failed a math test they studied really hard for, and they're worried about getting into college. What started as teenage attitude was actually disappointment and fear. By responding with empathy instead of authority, Tom was able to connect with his child and offer real support rather than just discipline. The beautiful thing about empathy is that it creates a positive feedback loop. When people feel understood by you, they become more open, which gives you more information to understand them even better, which deepens the connection further. But empathy isn't just about being a good person, though it certainly makes you one. It's also incredibly practical. Empathetic people are better negotiators because they understand what the other party really needs. They're better leaders because they can motivate people by connecting with their values and concerns. They're better friends, partners, and family members because they create the emotional safety that allows relationships to flourish. As we move forward in today's session, remember that everything we're going to learn builds on this foundation of empathy. You can't read nonverbal cues effectively without empathy. You can't build genuine rapport without empathy. And you certainly can't navigate conflict constructively without empathy. Empathy is your social navigation system. It tells you where other people are emotionally, so you can meet them there and build bridges to wherever you want to go together. 2. Reading nonverbal cues and emotional states. Have you ever had the experience of talking to someone who says they're fine, but something in your gut tells you they're anything but fine? Maybe their smile doesn't reach their eyes, or their voice has a tight quality to it, or they're holding their body in a way that suggests tension. Congratulations, you were reading nonverbal cues, and whether you realized it or not, you were using a sophisticated form of emotional intelligence. Dr. Albert Mehrabian's famous research found that when there's a disconnect between what someone says and how they say it, we rely much more heavily on nonverbal communication than on words alone. In fact, his studies suggested that 55% of communication is body language, 38% is tone of voice, and only 7% is the actual words. Now, these percentages have been debated and shouldn't be taken as absolute truth in every situation. But the core insight remains powerful. We communicate far more than we realize through channels other than our words. The problem is, most of us were never taught how to consciously read these signals. We might sense that something is off in a conversation, but we can't pinpoint what or why. We might feel like someone doesn't like us, but we can't explain what's giving us that impression. When you develop the ability to read nonverbal cues consciously, it's like gaining a superpower. Suddenly, you have access to information that most people miss entirely. Let me tell you about Jennifer, a sales representative who transformed her career by learning to read nonverbal cues. Jennifer was technically competent and knew her products inside and out, but her closing rate was consistently below average. She couldn't understand why prospects who seemed interested during their conversations would ultimately decide not to buy. Jennifer started paying attention to the non-verbal signals her prospects were sending. She noticed that when people were genuinely interested, they would lean forward slightly, maintain steady eye contact, and nod in agreement. But when they were politely listening, but not truly engaged, they would lean back, check their phone or watch, or give short, closed-ended responses. More importantly, Jennifer learned to recognize the moment when someone shifted from interested to concerned. She noticed that people would often furrow their brow slightly, cross their arms, or start speaking more quickly when a worry or objection arose, often before they voiced that concern directly. Armed with this awareness, Jennifer could address concerns before they became deal breakers. When she saw those nonverbal signs of worry, she would pause and ask, ... I'm sensing you might have a concern about something. What questions can I answer for you? This approach felt much more consultative than pushy, and Jennifer's closing rate improved by 40% within 6 months. So what should you be looking for? Let me break down the key categories of nonverbal communication. Facial expressions. Dr. Paul Ekman's groundbreaking research identified 7 universal facial expressions that appear across all cultures: happiness, sadness, anger, fear, surprise, disgust, and contempt. But beyond these basic emotions, there are subtle micro-expressions that last only fractions of a second but reveal true feelings. For example, when someone is trying to hide frustration, you might catch a brief flash of tightened lips or narrowed eyes before they compose their face into a neutral expression. When someone is nervous but trying to appear confident, you might see a quick lick of the lips or a slight furrow of the brow. Eye contact patterns. Eyes truly are windows to emotional states. When someone is genuinely interested in what you're saying, they'll maintain comfortable eye contact. When they're thinking deeply, they might look away briefly and then return their gaze to you. But be aware of cultural differences here. In some cultures, prolonged eye contact is considered disrespectful, especially with authority figures. The key is to notice changes in someone's normal pattern, posture, and body position. How someone holds their body tells you a lot about how they're feeling. Open postures, uncrossed arms, facing toward you, relaxed shoulders, generally indicate comfort and engagement. Closed postures, crossed arms, turned away, hunched shoulders can suggest defensiveness, discomfort, or disengagement. But context matters enormously. Someone might cross their arms because they're cold, not because they're defensive. This is why it's important to look for clusters of signals rather than relying on any single cue. Voice tone and pace. This is often the most reliable indicator of emotional state. Someone might say, "I'm fine," with words, but if their voice is tight, higher pitched than usual, or speaking more quickly, those vocal cues are telling you something different. Similarly, when people are sad or discouraged, their voice often becomes flatter and slower. When they're excited or nervous, it might become faster and more animated. Here's a common scenario that illustrates how these cues work together. You're having coffee with a friend who just started a new job. You ask how it's going, and she says, "Great, I love it there." But as she says this, her smile looks forced. She breaks eye contact and looks down at her coffee cup. Her voice has a slightly higher pitch than usual, and she immediately changes the subject. If you only listened to her words, you'd think everything was wonderful. But reading the nonverbal cues tells a different story. Something about the new job is bothering her, even if she's not ready to talk about it yet. Emotionally intelligent response might be, "I'm glad to hear you're settling in." New jobs can be exciting and overwhelming at the same time. How are you feeling about everything so far? This gives her permission to share more if she wants to, without putting pressure on her to contradict what she just said. Now here's a crucial point. Reading nonverbal cues isn't about becoming a human lie detector or trying to catch people in inconsistencies. It's about becoming more attuned to the full spectrum of human communication so you can respond more appropriately and compassionately. Sometimes people say they're fine when they're not because they don't want to burden you, or because they're not ready to talk, or because they're still processing their feelings. Recognizing the disconnect between their words and their nonverbal cues allows you to respond with extra gentleness and creates space for them to share more if they choose to. Let me share a family example. Maria noticed that her teenage son, David, would always say homework was fine when she asked, but his body language told a different story. He would slump his shoulders, avoid eye contact, and speak in a monotone voice. Instead of accepting his fine at face value or interrogating him about what was wrong, Maria learned to say something like, "Okay, well, I'm here if you want any help or just want to talk through anything." She created space without pressure. Over time, David began opening up more because he didn't feel like he was being forced to share, or that saying fine was being challenged as a lie. This is the difference between using emotional intelligence constructively versus manipulatively. The goal isn't to force people to reveal more than they're comfortable sharing. It's to become more sensitive to the full range of their communication so you can respond more thoughtfully. Practice this skill by becoming a student of human behavior. When you're in public spaces, coffee shops, waiting rooms, restaurants, practice observing, respectfully and non-creepily, how people's nonverbal communication changes during their conversations. Notice how a couple's body language shifts when they move from small talk to discussing something more serious. Observe how someone's posture changes when they receive good news versus disappointing news on a phone call. The more you practice conscious observation, the more natural and automatic this skill becomes. And the more automatic it becomes, the more you'll be able to respond to what people are actually experiencing, rather than just what they're saying. 3. Social skills, listening, rapport, and connection. Let me tell you about 2 job interviews that happened on the same day for the same position. Both candidates had similar qualifications, similar experience, and similar technical skills. But one got the job and the other didn't. The difference came down to social skills rooted in emotional intelligence. Candidate A, let's call him Steve, came prepared with impressive examples of his work, detailed knowledge about the company, and thoughtful questions about the role. When asked about his experience, Steve gave comprehensive answers that demonstrated his expertise. He was professional, competent, and clearly qualified. Candidate B, let's call her Angela, came equally prepared, but Angela did something different. She spent the first few minutes of the interview creating a human connection with the interviewer. When the interviewer mentioned she'd been in back-to-back meetings all morning, Angela said, "That sounds exhausting." "That sounds exhausting. I hope you're able to take a breather at some point today." When the interviewer shared that the team was working on a challenging project, Angela asked, "What's been the most rewarding part of tackling that challenge?" Throughout the interview, Angela practiced what psychologists call active listening. She didn't just wait for her turn to speak. She truly absorbed what the interviewer was saying and reflected it back. When the interviewer expressed concern about finding someone who could handle the fast-paced environment, Angela said, "It sounds like you need someone who can not only keep up with the pace, but also stay calm and focused when things get hectic. Is that right?" Angela got the job, not because she was more qualified than Steve, but because she made the interviewer feel heard, understood, and connected. The interviewer later told a colleague, "I could really see myself working with her. She gets it." This is the power of genuine social skills. They're not about being charming or manipulative. They're about creating authentic human connections that make every interaction more meaningful and effective. Let's break down the specific skills that made Angela successful, starting with active listening. Active listening, the foundation of all social skills. Most people think they're good listeners, but what they're actually doing is waiting for their turn to speak. They hear the words, but they're not truly absorbing the full message, the emotions, the concerns, the values underneath the words. Active listening has 4 key components. Full attention. This means putting away distractions, making appropriate eye contact, and positioning your body to show you're engaged. It means resisting the urge to formulate your response while the other person is still talking. Reflection. This involves paraphrasing what you've heard to ensure you understood correctly. So if I'm understanding you right, you're saying that the main challenge isn't the workload itself, but the unpredictability of when urgent requests come in. Clarification. Ask questions that help you understand more deeply. When you say the team dynamics are complicated, can you help me understand what that looks like day to day? Validation. Acknowledge the other person's feelings and perspective. That sounds really frustrating, or I can see why you'd be excited about that opportunity. Here's a workplace example of active listening in action. Your colleague Tom comes to you and says, "I'm so stressed about this presentation next week. I have way too much material, and I don't know how to fit it all in the time I have." The typical response might be, "Just cut out the less important stuff," or "You'll be fine. You always do great presentations." An active listening response would be, "It sounds like you're feeling overwhelmed by having to choose what to include and what to leave out. The challenge isn't just the time limit, it's making sure you don't leave out anything important. Is that right?" This response shows Tom that you truly understand his dilemma, which makes him feel heard and opens the door for more productive problem solving. Building rapport, the art of connection. Rapport is that magical feeling when two people are in sync, when conversation flows easily, when you feel understood and understood in return, when there's a sense of mutual liking and trust. Some people seem to build rapport naturally, but it's actually a learnable skill based on specific behaviors, mirroring and matching. This doesn't mean copying someone's every gesture, which would be weird and obvious. It means subtly matching their energy level, speaking pace, and general body language. If someone is speaking quietly and thoughtfully, you mirror that energy rather than being loud and boisterous. Finding common ground. Look for shared experiences, values, or interests. This might be as simple as discovering you both have teenagers, both enjoy hiking, or both struggled with the same challenging client. Showing genuine interest. Ask follow-up questions that demonstrate you care about their experiences and perspectives, instead of just saying, "That's nice." When someone mentions their weekend plans, ask, "What are you most looking forward to about that?" Let me share a networking example. Sarah, an accountant, used to dread networking events. She would stand in corners, have surface-level conversations about the weather, and leave feeling like she hadn't made any meaningful connections. Sarah learned to approach networking differently. Instead of trying to impress people with her credentials, she focused on getting genuinely curious about others. She would ask questions like, "What's the most interesting project you're working on right now?" Or, "What got you interested in this field originally?" When someone shared something with her, Sarah would listen for what they were passionate about and ask follow-up questions about that. If someone mentioned they were working on sustainability initiatives, Sarah might ask, "What aspect of sustainability work do you find most rewarding?" This approach transforms Sarah's networking experience. Instead of having dozens of forgettable small-talk conversations, she had fewer but much deeper conversations that led to genuine professional relationships. The power of open-ended questions. One of the fastest ways to deepen any conversation is to ask open-ended questions that invite people to share more about their experiences, thoughts, and feelings. Instead of, "Did you have a good weekend?" Try, "What was the highlight of your weekend?" Instead of, "Are you enjoying the new role?" Try, "What's been most surprising about the new role so far?" Instead of, "Is everything okay?" Try, "How are you feeling about everything that's going on?" These questions invite people to share more than just facts. They invite them to share their inner experience, which creates deeper connection, creating emotional safety. People connect most deeply when they feel emotionally safe, when they trust that they won't be judged, criticized, or dismissed. You create emotional safety through several behaviors, non-judgmental responses. When someone shares something vulnerable, resist the urge to immediately offer advice or share your own similar experience. Instead, acknowledge what they've shared. "That must have been really difficult," or "I can see why you'd feel conflicted about that." Confidentiality. If someone shares something personal, don't repeat it to others unless they've explicitly said it's okay to do so. People need to trust that their vulnerabilities are safe with you. Emotional validation. Acknowledge people's feelings as legitimate, even if you don't agree with their interpretation of events. "I can understand why you'd feel hurt by that." Doesn't mean you think their hurt is justified. It means you recognize that their feelings are real and valid. Here's a romantic relationship example. Jake and Maria have been together for 3 years. Recently, Maria started a new job that requires her to travel frequently. Jake is struggling with the change, but he's afraid to bring it up because he doesn't want to seem clingy or unsupportive. Finally, Jake decides to share his feelings. "I'm really proud of you for this new opportunity, and I want to be supportive. But I'm also struggling with how much you're traveling. I miss you, and I'm feeling a bit disconnected from our relationship." Maria has 2 choices. She could get defensive. "I thought you were supportive of my career. This opportunity is really important to me." Or she could create emotional safety. "I can see how the travel would be hard on both of us. I miss you too when I'm gone. Let's talk about how we can stay connected even when I'm traveling." The second response creates space for them to solve the problem together rather than turning it into a conflict. These social skills, active listening, building rapport, asking good questions, creating emotional safety, they're not just nice-to-have abilities. They're fundamental to success in every area of life. They determine the quality of your friendships, the strength of your romantic relationships, your effectiveness at work, and your ability to influence positive change in your community. The beautiful thing is that every conversation is an opportunity to practice these skills. Every interaction is a chance to become more socially intelligent. Start small, be patient with yourself, and watch how these skills compound over time to transform the quality of all your relationships. 4. Navigating conflict and difficult conversations. Let me start with a confession. I used to be terrible at conflict. My strategy was to avoid it at all costs, which meant I would let resentments build up until I either exploded in anger or withdrew completely from relationships. I thought conflict meant failure, that if 2 people were having a disagreement, someone was doing something wrong. It took me years to learn what emotionally intelligent people understand intuitively. Conflict isn't the enemy of good relationships. Avoiding conflict is. Healthy relationships aren't characterized by the absence of disagreement. They're characterized by the ability to navigate disagreement constructively. In fact, research by Dr. John Gottman shows that couples who learn to argue well have much stronger, more satisfying relationships than those who avoid conflict altogether. The key word here is learn. Most of us were never taught how to handle conflict skillfully. We learned by watching our families, and let's be honest, many of our families weren't exactly role models for healthy conflict resolution. But here's the good news. Conflict resolution is a learnable skill set, And when you approach it with emotional intelligence, disagreements become opportunities for deeper understanding and stronger connections. Let me tell you about David and Lisa, a married couple who came to me because they were fighting constantly about money. Every conversation about their budget ended in shouting, tears, or days of cold silence. The surface issue was spending. David thought Lisa was too frivolous with money, and Lisa thought David was too controlling. But when we dug deeper, using emotionally intelligent approaches, we discovered the real issues underneath. David had grown up in a family that experienced financial instability. His father had been laid off multiple times, and David remembered the stress and fear that surrounded money in his childhood home. For David, careful budgeting wasn't about being controlling. It was about creating security and avoiding the chaos he remembered from his youth. Lisa, on the other hand, had grown up in a family where money was used as a tool of control. Her mother had been financially dependent on her father, who would criticize every purchase and make Lisa's mother justify every expense. For Lisa, having the freedom to make spending decisions wasn't about being frivolous. It was about maintaining her autonomy and dignity. Once David and Lisa understood these deeper emotional drivers, their conflicts about money transformed. Instead of arguing about specific purchases, they were able to have conversations about their underlying needs. David's need for security and Lisa's need for autonomy. They found solutions that honored both needs, like setting aside money each month that each of them could spend without discussion, while also maintaining a shared budget for major expenses. This is what emotionally intelligent conflict resolution looks like. You address the emotions and needs underneath the surface positions. So how do you approach conflict this way? Let me share the framework that has transformed countless relationships. Step 1. Lead with curiosity, not certainty. When conflict arises, our natural tendency is to assume we understand the other person's motivations. You're being selfish. You don't care about my feelings. You're trying to control me. But emotionally intelligent people approach conflict with genuine curiosity about the other person's perspective. Instead of making assumptions, they ask questions designed to understand. Instead of, "You never listen to me," try, "I'm feeling unheard in our conversations. Can you help me understand how you experience our discussions?" Instead of, "You're always so negative," try, "I notice you seem concerned about this project. What worries you most about it?" This shift from accusation to inquiry completely changes the dynamic of the conversation. Step 2. Separate people from problems. One of the biggest mistakes we make in conflict is attacking the person instead of addressing the issue. When we say things like, "You're so inconsiderate," or "You never follow through," we're making the conflict about character flaws rather than specific behaviors or situations. Emotionally intelligent conflict resolution focuses on the problem, not the person. Instead of, "You're so disorganized," try, "I'm feeling stressed about the deadline because I'm not clear on what tasks have been completed. Can we review where things stand?" Instead of, "You don't care about our relationship," try, "When we don't spend quality time together, I start feeling disconnected from you. I'd love to find ways we can both feel more connected." Step 3. Use I statements with emotional precision. You've probably heard about using I statements, but most people use them incorrectly. They'll say something like, "I feel like you're being unreasonable," which isn't actually an I statement at all. It's still a disguised accusation. True I statements take responsibility for your own emotional experience and clearly communicate your needs. The formula is when specific behavior, I feel specific emotion, because specific need or value. What I need is specific request. For example, when meetings run over the scheduled time, I feel anxious because I have commitments to other people that I need to honor. What I need is for us to either stick to our time limits or reschedule when we need more time. This approach gives the other person information they can work with rather than criticism they need to defend against. Step 4. Practice de-escalation. When emotions run high, the logical parts of our brains go offline, and we go into fight or flight mode. In this state, productive conversation becomes nearly impossible. Emotionally intelligent people recognize when this is happening and know how to bring the temperature down. Some de-escalation techniques: acknowledge emotions. I can see this is really important to you, or I can tell we're both feeling frustrated right now. Take responsibility for your part. I think I may have come across as dismissive, and that wasn't my intention. Or, I realize I got defensive there. Suggest a pause. I think we both care about solving this, but we might be more productive if we take a short break and come back to it. Find common ground. We both want what's best for the team, or we both care about making this relationship work. Here's a workplace example of de-escalation in action. Jennifer, a project manager, is in a heated discussion with Tom, a developer, about missed deadlines. Tom is getting increasingly defensive, and Jennifer can feel her own frustration rising. Instead of continuing to press her points, Jennifer says, "Tom, I can see that you're feeling frustrated, and honestly, so am I. We both want this project to succeed, and we both care about doing good work. Maybe we're approaching this wrong. Instead of focusing on what went wrong, what if we focus on what we need to make sure the rest of the project goes smoothly?" This acknowledgement of shared values and shift in focus immediately changes the tone of the conversation. Step 5. Look for win-win solutions. The goal of emotionally intelligent conflict resolution isn't for one person to win and the other to lose. It's to find solutions that address the underlying needs of both parties. This requires creative thinking and a willingness to explore options beyond the obvious ones. Here's a family example. 15-year-old Alex wants to go to a party on Saturday night. Their parent, Sam, is worried about safety and wants Alex to be home by 10 p.m. Alex thinks 10 p.m. is unreasonably early and will embarrass them in front of their friends. A traditional approach might involve arguing about what time is reasonable until one person gives in or the conversation ends in frustration. An emotionally intelligent approach would explore the underlying needs. Alex needs to feel trusted and avoid embarrassment with friends. Sam needs to feel confident about Alex's safety. Together, they might come up with solutions like Alex checks in by text every 2 hours, Sam meets Alex's friends and their parents before the party. Alex earns a later curfew by demonstrating responsibility in smaller situations first, or Alex comes home at 10 p.m. but can have friends over the following weekend. These solutions address both parties' core needs, rather than just splitting the difference on curfew time. Remember, the goal of conflict isn't to avoid disagreement, it's to disagree well. When you approach conflict with emotional intelligence, you're not just solving immediate problems. You're building trust, deepening understanding, and creating stronger relationships that can weather future challenges. Every difficult conversation is an opportunity to practice these skills and to model a better way of handling human differences. The world desperately needs more people who can navigate conflict with wisdom, compassion, and skill. 5. End of part challenge and practice exercise. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground together in part 2. You've learned how to enhance your empathy and social perception, how to read the nonverbal cues that reveal what people are really thinking and feeling, how to build genuine rapport and connection through skilled listening, and how to navigate conflict in ways that strengthen rather than damage relationships. But here's what I know from working with thousands of people. Information without application is just entertainment. The insights you've gained today will only transform your life if you put them into practice consistently. So I'm going to give you a specific challenge that will allow you to integrate everything you've learned while building your confidence in real-world social situations. Your 7-day social intelligence challenge. For the next 7 days, I want you to choose one person in your life with whom you'd like to deepen your connection. This could be a colleague you've only had surface-level conversations with, a family member you feel distant from, a friend you'd like to understand better, or even a neighbor you barely know. Your mission is to have one meaningful conversation with this person using the skills we've discussed today. Here's your step-by-step guide. Day 1. 2. Observation and preparation. Before you initiate the conversation, spend a day or two practicing your observation skills with this person. When you interact with them, pay attention to their nonverbal cues. What do you notice about their body language, tone of voice, and facial expressions that you might have missed before? Also, think about what you know about their current life situation. Are they dealing with any challenges? Do they have any exciting projects or changes happening? What might they be feeling that they haven't directly expressed? Day 3 to 4. Planning your approach. Decide when and how you want to have this deeper conversation. It doesn't need to be formal or scheduled. It might be as simple as asking a better question when you naturally encounter this person. Think about what genuine question you could ask that would invite them to share more of their inner experience. Remember our examples. What's been the most rewarding part of your new role? How are you feeling about everything that's happening with situation they've mentioned? What's been on your mind lately? Day 5 to 7, the conversation. Now comes the practice. When you have your conversation, focus on the final chapter, living your emotional intelligence. Welcome back, my friend. We've traveled quite a journey together through the landscape of emotional intelligence. You've learned to recognize your emotions, understand others, and navigate the complex world of human connection. Now comes the most important part, taking everything you've learned and applying it in the real world, where relationships are tested, leadership is forged, and your true character is revealed. This final section isn't just about theory anymore. It's about transformation. It's about becoming the person who walks into a room and changes the energy, who turns conflict into connection, and who leads not through authority, but through authentic influence. Let's dive deep into the practical applications that will make emotional intelligence not just something you know, but something you live. Emotional resilience, thriving in the face of adversity. Picture this. It's 2008, and Sarah Chen has just watched her marketing agency lose its 3 biggest clients in a single week. The financial crisis has hit, and businesses are cutting budgets left and right. She's sitting in her empty office at 9 p.m., wondering how she'll make payroll for her 12 employees. This is the moment that would define not just her business, but her understanding of what it truly means to be emotionally resilient. Instead of spiraling into panic or denial, Sarah took a deep breath and asked herself 3 crucial questions that would change everything. What am I feeling right now? What can I control? And what is this situation trying to teach me? This is emotional resilience in action. Not the absence of difficult emotions, but the ability to feel them fully, while maintaining your capacity to think clearly and act purposefully. The neuroscience of resilience. Your brain is wired for survival, not necessarily for thriving. When faced with adversity, your amygdala, that ancient alarm system, floods your system with stress hormones. But here's what neuroscience has taught us. You can literally rewire your brain for resilience through practice. Dr. Rick Hansen, a neuropsychologist, calls this taking in the good. Every time you consciously acknowledge your ability to handle a difficult situation, you're strengthening neural pathways that support resilience. It's like building muscle. The more you practice emotional resilience, the stronger it becomes. The 3 pillars of emotional resilience. First, emotional awareness under pressure. When adversity strikes, most people either shut down emotionally or get overwhelmed by their feelings. The emotionally resilient person does something different. They get curious about their emotions instead of being controlled by them. Take Marcus, a surgeon who lost a patient during what should have been a routine operation. Instead of drowning in guilt or becoming defensive, he practiced what psychologists call emotional labeling. He said to himself, "I'm feeling devastated right now. I'm also feeling scared about my competence. And underneath that, I'm feeling deeply sad for this family's loss." This simple act of naming emotions doesn't make them disappear, but it activates the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of your brain, which helps regulate the emotional intensity. It's the difference between being swept away by a river and learning to navigate its currents. Second, the power of cognitive flexibility. Resilient people don't see setbacks as permanent character flaws or evidence that they're destined to fail. They see them as data points in a larger story that's still being written. Sarah, our marketing agency owner, didn't interpret losing those clients as proof she was a bad businesswoman. Instead, she asked, "What is this crisis revealing about what my clients really need?" This shift in perspective led her to pivot her entire business model toward helping small businesses navigate economic uncertainty, a move that made her more successful than she'd ever been. Psychologist Carol Dweck calls this a growth mindset, the belief that abilities and intelligence can be developed through dedication and hard work. When you apply this to emotional challenges, you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this teaching me about myself and others?" Third, building your support ecosystem. Here's a truth that might surprise you. Emotional resilience isn't a solo sport. The most resilient people have mastered the art of strategic vulnerability, knowing when and how to reach out for support. Research by Dr. Brain Brown shows that people who recover most quickly from setbacks have cultivated what she calls shame resilience, the ability to reach out to trusted people when they're struggling, rather than isolating themselves. This doesn't mean complaining to everyone who will listen. It means having 2 or 3 people in your life who you can call when you're in the valley. People who will listen without trying to fix you, and who will remind you of your strength when you've temporarily forgotten it. Practical resilience techniques you can use today. The 24-hour rule. When something emotionally challenging happens, commit to waiting 24 hours before making any major decisions or having difficult conversations. This gives your nervous system time to regulate and your prefrontal cortex time to come back online. During this 24-hour period, practice what I call emotional fact-checking. Write down what happened versus what you're making it mean. For example, what happened? My proposal was rejected. What I'm making it mean? I'm not good enough for this job. Usually, you'll discover that the facts are much less devastating than the story you're telling yourself. The resilience questions. When faced with any setback, ask yourself these 4 questions. What am I feeling right now? And what is that emotion trying to tell me? What aspects of this situation can I influence or control? What would I tell my best friend if they were facing this same challenge? How might this experience be preparing me for something I can't see yet? These questions redirect your brain from victim mode to learner mode, from helplessness to empowerment. Leadership and teamwork, influence through EQ. Let me tell you about Captain David Marquet, a nuclear submarine commander who revolutionized leadership not through authority, but through emotional intelligence. When he took command of the USS Santa Fe, at the time, the worst performing submarine in the fleet, he made a radical decision that would change everything. Instead of giving orders, he started asking questions. Instead of demanding compliance, he began building competence. Instead of ruling through fear, he chose to lead through curiosity and genuine care for his crew's development. Within months, the Santa Fe went from last place to first in performance rankings. More importantly, the crew transformed from disengaged followers into proactive leaders at every level. This is the power of emotionally intelligent leadership. It doesn't just improve performance, it transforms human potential. The 4 domains of EQ leadership. Self-awareness in leadership. Great leaders know their emotional triggers, their strengths, and their blind spots. They understand how their mood affects the entire team's energy. Captain Marquet realized that his need to be the smartest person in the room was actually making his crew dependent and disengaged. Self-aware leaders regularly ask themselves, how is my emotional state affecting my team right now? What am I modeling through my behavior? What do I need to shift to bring out the best in others? Self-management under pressure. The submarine environment is inherently stressful. Lives depend on split-second decisions made in confined spaces with no room for error. Marquet discovered that his ability to remain calm and curious under pressure gave his crew permission to think clearly and speak up when they saw problems. Research by Daniel Goleman shows that leaders' emotions are contagious. They literally spread through teams like wildfire. When a leader manages their emotions well, it creates what psychologists call psychological safety, an environment where people feel safe to take risks, make mistakes, and contribute their best thinking. Social awareness, reading the room. Emotionally intelligent leaders are constantly scanning the emotional climate of their teams. They notice when someone is struggling before that person even speaks up. They sense tension between team members and address it before it becomes destructive. Marquet trained himself to notice not just what people were saying, but how they were saying it. He paid attention to body language, energy levels, and the subtle signs that someone had something to contribute but wasn't speaking up. Relationship management. Building trust through vulnerability. Here's what most leaders get wrong about authority. They think it comes from having all the answers. Emotionally intelligent leaders understand that real authority comes from creating conditions where others can find their own answers. Marquet started saying 3 words that transformed his leadership. I don't know. When he didn't have information his crew needed, instead of pretending or deflecting, he admitted his limitations and asked for help. This vulnerability didn't diminish his authority. It actually increased it because his crew saw him as human and trustworthy. EQ in team dynamics. Think about the best team you've ever been part of. I'm willing to bet it wasn't necessarily the most talented group, but it was the group where people felt safe to be themselves, where conflicts were addressed directly but respectfully, and where everyone felt their contributions mattered. Google's Project Aristotle studied hundreds of teams to discover what made some high-performing and others dysfunctional. The number one factor wasn't talent, resources, or even strategy. It was psychological safety, the shared belief that team members could show vulnerability, ask questions, and admit mistakes without fear of negative consequences. Creating psychological safety through EQ. As a team member or leader, you can build psychological safety by acknowledging uncertainty. I'm not sure about this approach, but here's my thinking. This gives others permission to share their doubts and ideas. Admitting mistakes quickly. I made an error in judgment here, and here's what I'm learning from it. This creates a culture where people can fail forward instead of hiding problems. Asking for feedback regularly. What am I missing? How could I have handled that better? This signals that growth and learning are valued over being right. Diffusing team tension with EQ. Last year, I worked with a marketing team where 2 senior members, Janet and Kevin, had been locked in what seemed like irreconcilable conflict for months. Their manager, Lisa, tried everything: separate meetings, mediation, even threats of disciplinary action. Nothing worked until she tried an emotionally intelligent approach. Instead of focusing on who was right or wrong, Lisa asked each person to share what they were feeling and what they needed to feel respected and valued on the team. What emerged was surprising. Both Janet and Kevin felt undervalued and were competing for recognition instead of collaborating. Lisa then created a team ritual where, at the beginning of each project, team members would share not just their responsibilities, but their concerns and what support they needed from each other. This simple practice transformed the team dynamic from competitive to collaborative. Difficult conversations. Communicating with courage and clarity. There's a conversation you've been avoiding. You know the one I'm talking about. Maybe it's with your partner about feeling disconnected, or with your boss about feeling undervalued, or with a friend whose behavior has been consistently hurtful. You've rehearsed it in your head 100 times, but when the moment comes, you either avoid it entirely or it explodes into an argument that makes things worse. Here's what I want you to understand. Difficult conversations aren't difficult because of the topics. They're difficult because of the emotions involved. And when you learn to navigate emotions skillfully, these conversations transform from something you dread into opportunities for deeper connection and understanding. The anatomy of a difficult conversation. Every challenging conversation has 3 levels happening simultaneously. The content level, what you're actually talking about. The emotional level, what you're feeling and what the other person is feeling. The identity level, what this conversation means about who you are and who they are. Most people focus only on the content and ignore the emotional and identity levels, which is why these conversations often spiral out of control or fail to create any real change. The GRACE framework for difficult conversations. I want to give you a framework that will transform how you approach these conversations. I call it GRACE. G. Ground yourself. Before you enter any difficult conversation, take time to understand your own emotional state. Ask yourself, what am I feeling? What do I want to achieve? What assumptions am I making about the other person's intentions? Lisa, a team leader I worked with, was dreading a conversation with an employee who had been consistently missing deadlines. She was feeling frustrated and disrespected, and her instinct was to deliver an ultimatum. But when she grounded herself first, she realized she was also feeling concerned about him. She'd noticed he seemed overwhelmed and stressed. This emotional awareness completely changed her approach. Instead of starting with accusations, she started with curiosity. R. Reflect their experience. Begin the conversation by acknowledging what you imagine the other person might be experiencing. This doesn't mean you agree with their behavior, but it shows that you see them as a human being with their own perspective. Lisa started her conversation this way. I've noticed you've been struggling to meet some deadlines lately, and I'm wondering if you're feeling overwhelmed with your workload. I want to understand what's been happening from your perspective. This immediately shifted the conversation from adversarial to collaborative. A. Ask powerful questions. Instead of making statements about what someone should or shouldn't do, Ask questions that help both of you understand the situation more deeply. Some powerful questions include, help me understand what this situation looks like from your perspective. What would need to change for this to work better for both of us? What are you needing from me that you're not getting? What matters most to you in this situation? C. Create safety. People can't think clearly when they feel threatened. Create emotional safety by acknowledging the difficulty of the conversation and emphasizing your shared goals. You might say, "This feels like a hard conversation to have, and I appreciate you being willing to talk about it. I care about you and our relationship, and I want to find a way forward that works for both of us." E. Explore solutions together. Once you understand each other's perspectives and needs, brainstorm solutions together. This collaborative approach ensures buy-in and creates solutions that neither person could have developed alone. In Lisa's case, she discovered that her employee was indeed overwhelmed. He'd been taking on extra projects without telling anyone because he wanted to prove his value to the team. Together, they created a system for better communication about workload and established regular check-ins to prevent future overwhelm. Transforming conflict into connection. Here's a story that illustrates the power of this approach. Maria and her teenage daughter Sophie had been locked in constant battles about curfew, chores, and screen time. Every conversation ended in yelling, doors slamming, and both feeling misunderstood. Pause. One evening, instead of launching into another lecture about responsibility, Maria tried something different. She sat down with Sophie and said, "I feel like we've been fighting a lot lately, and I don't think either of us likes it. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to help me understand what it feels like to be you right now." What followed was the first real conversation they'd had in months. Sophie shared that she felt like Maria didn't trust her, that the rules felt arbitrary and controlling, and that she was struggling with anxiety about college applications, but didn't know how to ask for help. Maria shared that her controlling behavior came from love and worry. She wanted Sophie to develop self-discipline because she cared about her future, not because she wanted to make her life difficult. By the end of that conversation, they had co-created a system where Sophie earned increased freedom by demonstrating responsibility, and Maria provided more emotional support around college stress. The fighting didn't stop completely. They're still mother and daughter after all. But it transformed from destructive battles into productive problem-solving sessions. Sentence starters that change everything. The words you use to begin difficult conversations can determine whether they lead to connection or conflict. Here are some emotionally intelligent sentence starters. Instead of, "You always interrupt me," try, "I've noticed I feel unheard in our conversations, and I'm wondering if we could find a way to make sure we're both feeling listened to." Instead of, "You're being unreasonable," try, "I'm having trouble understanding your perspective on this. Could you help me see it through your eyes?" Instead of, "You need to change this behavior," try, "I'm struggling with this situation, and I'm hoping we can work together to find a solution that works for both of us." Notice how these reframes focus on your experience rather than their character, create curiosity rather than defensiveness, and invite collaboration rather than demanding compliance. Managing criticism without losing confidence. In 2010, food critic Pete Wells published a scathing review of celebrity chef Guy Fieri's restaurant in Times Square. The review went viral, not just for its harsh criticism, but for its creative brutality. It was the kind of public criticism that could destroy a career and send someone into hiding. But here's what's fascinating. Instead of becoming defensive or attacking back, Fieri responded with remarkable emotional intelligence. He acknowledged the criticism, took responsibility for what wasn't working, and used the feedback as motivation to improve. Years later, he and Wells even became friends. This is emotional mastery, the ability to separate feedback about your work from judgments about your worth as a person. The psychology of criticism. When someone criticizes us, three things happen simultaneously in our brains. First, our threat detection system activates. The same system that kept our ancestors alive when facing physical danger. Your brain literally can't tell the difference between a tiger charging at you and someone questioning your quarterly report. Second, our ego protection mechanisms kick in. We either fight back, shut down, or deflect blame to protect our sense of self. Third, our inner critic, that harsh voice that's been collecting evidence of our inadequacy since childhood, gets louder and more vicious than the external criticism ever was. Understanding this process is the first step to managing it. The 4 types of criticism. Not all criticism is created equal. Learning to distinguish between different types helps you respond appropriately. Constructive feedback. This comes from someone who wants to help you improve. It's specific, actionable, and delivered with care. Even if it stings, there's wisdom you can extract. Example, your presentation had great content, but I noticed you seemed nervous and rushed through the key points. Have you considered practicing out loud more, or maybe slowing down your pace? Destructive criticism. This is meant to tear you down rather than build you up. It's often vague, personal, and delivered with malice. Example, you're terrible at public speaking. I don't know why they even asked you to present. Projection. Sometimes criticism says more about the critic than about you. They're projecting their own insecurities, fears, or failures onto you. Example, someone who failed at starting their own business, telling you that entrepreneurship is just gambling with your future. Wisdom wrapped in poor delivery. This is constructive feedback, delivered in a destructive way. The message is valuable, but the delivery is harsh or thoughtless. Example, your writing is boring and puts people to sleep. No one wants to read stuff like that. Translation, your writing could be more engaging. Consider varying your sentence structure and adding more compelling examples. The filter method for processing criticism. F. Feel it first. Don't try to immediately rationalize or dismiss your emotional response. If criticism hurts, let it hurt for a moment. Acknowledge the disappointment, anger, or sadness without judgment. Neuroscientist Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor discovered that emotions, if not fed by repetitive thoughts, naturally process through your body in about 90 seconds. Let yourself feel the initial wave of emotion without adding stories about what it means. Identify the source. Consider who's giving the criticism and why. Are they qualified to give feedback in this area? Do they have your best interests at heart? Are they projecting their own issues? This doesn't mean dismissing criticism from unexpected sources. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from people outside your field, but it helps you calibrate how much weight to give the feedback. L. Look for the kernel of truth. Even harsh or poorly delivered criticism often contains some element of truth. Your job is to extract the wisdom while leaving behind the poison. Ask yourself, if I remove the emotional charge from this feedback, what specific information might be useful? Sometimes the most painful criticism points to blind spots you couldn't see on your own. T. Take what serves you. You don't have to accept all criticism, but you can choose to take the parts that will help you grow. Think of it like mining for gold. You sift through a lot of dirt to find the valuable nuggets. E. Elevate your response. How you respond to criticism says more about your character than the criticism itself. You can respond with curiosity instead of defensiveness, with gratitude instead of resentment. This doesn't mean being a doormat. You can set boundaries around how you're willing to be spoken to, but it means choosing your response consciously rather than reacting automatically. R. Reflect and refine. After the emotional charge has settled, reflect on what you've learned. How might this feedback help you improve? What patterns are you noticing in the criticism you receive? What strengths can you build on? Separating worth from work. Here's a truth that will set you free. You are not your work. Your value as a human being doesn't fluctuate based on quarterly performance reviews, creative critiques, or social media comments. Researcher Kristen Neff's work on self-compassion shows that people who can separate their identity from their performance actually perform better over time. They take more creative risks, recover faster from setbacks, and maintain higher levels of motivation. Practice this mantra. This feedback is about something I did, not about who I am. I can improve my work without diminishing my worth. Using criticism as fuel. The most successful people don't avoid criticism, they court it. They actively seek feedback because they understand that criticism is often the price of innovation and growth. Sarah Blakely, founder of Spanx, was rejected by countless manufacturers before finally finding one willing to produce her product. Instead of seeing each no as evidence that her idea was flawed, she saw them as data points, helping her refine her pitch and product. She developed what she calls failure parties, celebrations when something didn't work out, because it meant she was taking risks and learning quickly. Start viewing criticism not as an attack on your character, but as market research for your growth. What are people consistently saying? Where are the opportunities for improvement? How can you use this information to become stronger? Fostering emotional intimacy in relationships. There's a moment in every deep relationship when you have a choice. It usually comes during conflict, or in a moment of vulnerability, or when someone you care about is sharing their deepest fears. You can choose safety, staying on the surface, avoiding the messy emotions, keeping things comfortable, or you can choose intimacy. Intimacy isn't just about romance. It's about being fully known and fully accepted. It's about creating space for another person's complete emotional experience, not just the pretty parts. And it requires a level of emotional intelligence that goes beyond understanding. It requires courage. The architecture of emotional intimacy. Dr. John Gottman's research with thousands of couples reveals that emotional intimacy isn't built through grand gestures or perfect communication. It's built through what he calls emotional bids. Small moments when someone reaches out for connection and their partner either turns toward them or turns away. These bids happen constantly. Your partner mentions they're worried about a work presentation. Your child shows you a drawing they made. Your friend texts you about a difficult day. Your parent shares a memory from their childhood. Each of these moments is an invitation to connect. How you respond determines whether intimacy grows or withers. The 4 levels of listening. Most of us think we're good listeners, but emotional intimacy requires a deeper level of listening than most people ever develop. Level 1. Waiting to talk. You're not really listening. You're formulating your response, waiting for your turn to speak, or thinking about something else entirely. Level 2. Factual listening. You're hearing the words and understanding the information, but you're missing the emotional content. Level 3. Empathetic listening. You're tuning in to not just what they're saying, but what they're feeling. You're picking up on tone, body language, and the emotions beneath the words. Level 4. Intuitive listening. You're listening not just to what they're saying and feeling, but to what they're not saying. You're picking up on their deeper needs, fears, and desires. Let me give you an example. Your partner comes home and says, "I had the worst day of work. My boss criticized my project in front of the whole team." Level 1 response: "Oh, that's too bad. What's for dinner?" Level 2 response: "What exactly did your boss say about your project?" Level 3 response: "That sounds really embarrassing and frustrating. I can see you're upset." Level 4 response: "That sounds humiliating. I imagine you're not just frustrated about the criticism, but also feeling vulnerable about being criticized publicly. What would feel most supportive right now?" Notice how each level creates different possibilities for connection. The practice of emotional attunement. Attunement is the ability to sense and respond to another person's emotional state. It's like being a skilled musician who can hear when someone else is playing off-key and gently help them find the right note. This skill requires 3 components. Awareness, noticing subtle changes in mood, energy, or behavior. Understanding, accurately interpreting what those changes mean. Response, responding in a way that helps the other person feel seen and supported. Here's how this looks in practice. You notice your teenager has been unusually quiet during dinner. Awareness. You recognize that they're not just tired. There's something weighing on them. Understanding. Instead of immediately asking what's wrong or trying to cheer them up, you create space for them to share if they want to. Response. You might say, "You seem like you have something on your mind. I'm here if you want to talk." Or, "I'm also fine just being quietly together." This approach honors their emotional experience without forcing disclosure. Vulnerability as a bridge. Brené Brown's research shows that vulnerability is the birthplace of connection, creativity, and change. But vulnerability in relationships isn't about oversharing or emotional dumping. It's about authentic sharing that invites deeper connection. Strategic vulnerability involves sharing your struggles, not to get sympathy, but to let others know they're not alone in their challenges. Acknowledging your mistakes, taking responsibility for your part in conflicts or misunderstandings, expressing your needs, clearly communicating what you need to feel loved, supported, or understood, showing your authentic self, letting people see who you are beyond your roles and achievements. Let me share a story about Tom and Jennifer, a couple who came to me after 15 years of marriage, feeling like roommates rather than lovers. They were polite, functional, and completely disconnected emotionally. In one session, I asked them each to share something they'd never told the other person. Not a secret or betrayal, but something true about their inner experience. Tom, a successful attorney who projected confidence in every area of his life, shared that he often felt like he was pretending to be someone he wasn't, and that he was terrified Jennifer would eventually see through his facade and lose respect for him. Jennifer, who had always been the stable one in their relationship, shared that she sometimes felt invisible in their marriage. Like Tom appreciated what she did, but didn't really see who she was. These vulnerable admissions didn't solve all their problems, but they created a bridge between their separate emotional islands. For the first time in years, they saw each other as complex human beings rather than functional partners. Creating emotional safety. Emotional intimacy can only flourish in an environment of safety. This means creating relationships where people can share their full emotional experience without fear of judgment, rejection, or retaliation. Building emotional safety requires consistency. Your responses to emotional sharing need to be predictably supportive, even when you disagree with the content. Confidentiality. What's shared in intimate moments stays between you unless explicitly agreed otherwise. Curiosity over judgment. Approaching others' emotional experiences with genuine interest rather than evaluation. Emotional regulation. Managing your own emotional reactions so others don't have to take care of your feelings when they're sharing theirs. The gift of presence. In our hyper-connected, multitasking world, one of the greatest gifts you can give someone is your complete presence. Not just your physical presence, but your emotional and mental presence. This means putting away devices when someone is sharing something important, making eye contact and using body language that shows engagement, resisting the urge to give advice unless specifically asked, reflecting back what you're hearing to show you're truly listening, asking follow-up questions that help the person explore their experience more deeply. Presence is a practice, not a perfection. Every time you choose to be fully present with someone, you're building emotional intimacy one moment at a time. Leading conversations and influencing others. In 1955, a young Baptist minister in Montgomery, Alabama, faced an impossible challenge. The city's African-American community was organizing a bus boycott, and they needed someone to lead it. Martin Luther King Jr. was only 26 years old, new to the city, and had never led anything like this before. But Dr. King possessed something more powerful than experience or authority. He understood how to influence hearts and minds through emotional intelligence. He didn't try to force people to follow him through demands or manipulation. Instead, he connected with their deepest values, acknowledged their fears, and painted a vision of possibility that made courage feel not just necessary, but inevitable. This is the difference between positional power and influential power. Positional power says, "Do this because I'm in charge." Influential power says, "Let's do this because it aligns with who we are and who we're becoming." The psychology of ethical influence. True influence isn't about getting people to do what you want. It's about helping them discover what they already know is right and giving them the courage to act on it. Research by Robert Cialdini identifies 6 principles of persuasion, but emotional intelligence adds a 7th: authentic connection. People are influenced most by those they trust, and trust is built through genuine understanding and care for others' well-being. The Inspire Framework for Influential Conversations. 1. Inquire before you advocate. Most people start conversations by stating their position and then trying to convince others they're right. Influential people do the opposite. They start with genuine curiosity about others' perspectives. Instead of, "Here's what I think we should do," try, "I'm curious about your thoughts on this situation. What do you see as the most important factors to consider?" This approach accomplishes 2 things. It gives you information about what matters most to the other person, and it makes them feel heard before you share your own perspective. N. Name the shared values. Every influential conversation is built on common ground. Your job is to identify the values, goals, or concerns that you both share and make those explicit. It sounds like we both care deeply about the team's success and want to make sure everyone feels valued and supported. We might have different ideas about how to achieve that, but our underlying goal is the same. When people feel aligned on values, they're much more open to considering different strategies. S. Share your perspective as one possibility. Instead of presenting your ideas as the only solution, frame them as one possible approach worth considering. Based on what you've shared, here's one way we might approach this. What's your reaction to that idea? This language invites collaboration rather than creating defensiveness. P. Paint a picture of possibility. Help people envision what success would look like if they moved in the direction you're suggesting. Make it vivid and connect it to their values and goals. Imagine if 6 months from now, our team meetings were places where everyone felt comfortable sharing ideas, where conflicts got resolved quickly and respectfully, and where people actually looked forward to collaborating. What impact do you think that would have on our results? I invite partnership. Instead of trying to convince someone to adopt your solution, invite them to help you refine it or develop it further. What would need to be adjusted about this approach for it to work in your situation? What am I not considering? This transforms the conversation from persuasion to collaboration. R. Respect the process. Sometimes people need time to process new ideas before they can embrace them. Respect their timeline and create space for them to arrive at their own conclusions. I can see this is something worth thinking about more. What would be helpful? Should we schedule time to discuss this further? Or would you prefer to reflect on it and get back to me? E. Encourage action. Once someone has decided to move forward, help them identify specific, manageable first steps. What feels like the most natural first step? What support do you need to move forward? How will we know if this approach is working? Reading emotional cues in conversations. Influential people are constantly reading the emotional temperature of their conversations and adjusting their approach accordingly. Watch for these signs that someone is becoming resistant or overwhelmed. Crossed arms or defensive body language. Repeated questions about feasibility or resources. Bringing up past failures or obstacles. Becoming quiet or disengaged. Speaking faster or with more tension in their voice. When you notice resistance, don't push harder. Get curious about it. I'm sensing some hesitation about this approach. What concerns are coming up for you? Or it seems like something about this isn't sitting right. Help me understand what's not working. This curiosity often reveals important information that can help you adjust your approach or address underlying concerns. The difference between influence and manipulation. Let me be crystal clear about something. There's a profound difference between ethical influence and manipulation, and that difference lies in your intention. Manipulation seeks to benefit you at someone else's expense. It uses people's emotions against them and often involves deception or coercion. Ethical influence seeks mutual benefit. It respects others' autonomy and helps them make decisions that align with their own values and goals. Here's the test. If the other person had complete information about your motivations and methods, would they still feel good about the interaction? If the answer is no, you've crossed the line into manipulation. Influencing in different contexts in sales and business. The best salespeople don't sell products. They help people buy solutions to problems they actually have. They use emotional intelligence to understand not just what someone needs functionally, but what they need emotionally. Take Sarah, the financial advisor who was struggling to connect with potential clients. She was great at explaining investment strategies, but terrible at closing deals. When she started focusing on the emotional aspects of financial planning, the fear of not having enough for retirement, the desire to provide for children's education, the stress of financial uncertainty, her business transformed. Instead of leading with charts and numbers, she started with questions like, when you think about your financial future, what keeps you up at night? And what would financial security mean for your family? This emotional connection made the technical information relevant and compelling. In parenting and mentoring, influential parents and mentors don't rely on authority alone. They help young people discover their own motivations for good choices. Instead of, you need to study harder because I said so, try, I'm curious about your goals for this semester. What kind of student do you want to be? What would need to change for you to feel proud of your effort? This approach helps young people develop internal motivation rather than external compliance. In team leadership, influential leaders help their teams connect individual tasks to larger purposes and shared values. During a particularly challenging project, instead of just demanding longer hours, one leader I worked with said, I know this deadline is putting pressure on everyone. Help me understand how this is affecting you personally, and let's figure out together how to make this sustainable while still delivering excellent work for our client. This led to creative solutions that no one person could have developed alone. Some team members worked different hours. Others took on different types of tasks, and they brought in temporary support for non-essential activities. Setting boundaries and protecting emotional space. Jessica had always been the person everyone came to with their problems. She was proud of being supportive, of being the friend who always said yes, of being indispensable at work. But by age 35, she was exhausted, resentful, and burning out. She would lie awake at night, thinking about everyone else's problems instead of her own. She missed her daughter's school play because a colleague desperately needed her to stay late. She canceled her own therapy appointments to be available for friends in crisis. Jessica's story illustrates a painful truth. Having no boundaries isn't kindness, it's self-abandonment. And when you abandon yourself, you eventually become unable to truly help anyone else. Understanding boundaries versus barriers. Many people confuse boundaries with walls. Walls are rigid, defensive structures that keep everyone out. Boundaries are more like gates. They allow you to choose who gets access to your time, energy, and emotional space, and under what circumstances. Healthy boundaries aren't about being selfish or uncaring. They're about being intentional with your resources so you can show up fully for what matters most. The 4 types of boundaries. Physical boundaries. These involve your personal space, physical affection, and bodily autonomy. This includes everything from not wanting to be hugged by acquaintances to having your workspace respected. Recognizing when your boundaries need attention. Your body and emotions are constantly giving you information about when your boundaries are being crossed. Learn to recognize these signals. Physical signs. Feeling drained after certain interactions. Tension in your jaw, shoulders, or stomach around specific people. Difficulty sleeping due to worry about others' problems. Getting sick more frequently due to stress. Emotional signs. Feeling resentful toward people you care about. Anxiety about checking messages or answering calls. Feeling guilty when you're not helping someone. Losing touch with your own needs and preferences. Behavioral signs. Saying yes when you want to say no. Over-explaining or justifying your decisions. Avoiding certain people or situations. Procrastinating on your own priorities while handling others' urgent requests. The SPACE method for setting healthy boundaries. S. Stop and assess. Before you can set appropriate boundaries, you need to understand your current patterns. Ask yourself, where do I feel most drained in my relationships? What requests do I automatically say yes to, even when I don't want to? Which people or situations consistently leave me feeling depleted? What am I afraid will happen if I set boundaries? P. Prioritize your non-negotiables. Identify what matters most to you. Your core values, essential relationships, and critical goals. These become your non-negotiables, the things you protect above all else. For Jessica, her non-negotiables became being present for her daughter's important events, maintaining her own physical and mental health, and having at least 2 hours per week for activities that brought her joy. A. Articulate your boundaries clearly. Vague boundaries are weak boundaries. Be specific about what you will and won't do, and communicate this clearly. Instead of, I can't always be available, I check work email between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. on weekdays. For true emergencies, you can call my cell phone, but I consider an emergency to be something that can't wait until the next business day. C. Communicate with compassion. You can set firm boundaries while still being kind. Acknowledge others' needs while protecting your own. I can see this situation is really stressing you out, and I care about you. I'm not available to talk tonight because I have family commitments, but I could talk tomorrow at lunch if that would help. E. Enforce consistently. Boundaries only work if you maintain them consistently. This is often the hardest part, especially when people push back or try to make you feel guilty. Remember, other people's reactions to your boundaries are information about them, not about whether your boundaries are reasonable. Common boundary challenges and how to handle them. The guilt trip. I guess I can't count on you anymore. You've changed. I thought we were closer than this. Response. I understand you're disappointed. My caring about you hasn't changed, but I'm learning to take better care of myself so I can show up more fully in my relationships. The emergency that isn't. Some people create false urgency to override your boundaries. Learn to distinguish between real emergencies and poor planning on someone else's part. Response: this sounds important to you. Since it's not an emergency, let's schedule a time when I can give it proper attention. The boundary tester. Some people will repeatedly test your boundaries to see if you'll cave. Each time you maintain your boundary, you're teaching them to respect it. Stay calm, restate your boundary, and follow through with the consequences you've established. Setting boundaries at work. Professional boundaries can be especially challenging because there's often pressure to be a team player and concerns about career advancement. Here are some work boundaries that protect your effectiveness. Communication boundaries. I respond to non-urgent emails within 24 hours during business days. I'm available for calls between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. unless we've scheduled something different. Workload boundaries. I want to make sure I can give this project the attention it deserves. Given my current commitments, I could start this on date, or we could discuss what current projects might be delayed. Meeting boundaries. I'd like to make sure this meeting is the best use of everyone's time. Could you send an agenda in advance so I can prepare effectively? Boundaries. In close relationships, setting boundaries with people you love can feel especially difficult, but it's often where boundaries are most needed. With family, I love you and want to maintain a good relationship with you. When conversations become about criticizing my life choices, I feel hurt and want to withdraw. I'd prefer to focus our time together on enjoying each other's company. With friends, I value our friendship and want to be supportive. I'm not available to discuss specific person or topic because it feels unproductive for both of us. I'm happy to talk about other things or do activities together. With romantic partners, I need some time to process what happened before we continue this conversation. I care about resolving this, and I'll be able to engage more productively if we revisit this tomorrow. Bringing it all together, long-term confidence and growth. Take a moment to think about who you were when you started this journey. Remember the person who felt overwhelmed by others' emotions, who avoided difficult conversations, who said yes when they meant no, who took criticism as a personal attack on their worth. Now think about who you're becoming. Someone who can stay calm in emotional storms. Someone who can navigate conflict with grace and turn it into connection. Someone who influences others through authentic care rather than manipulation. Someone who protects their emotional energy while still showing up fully for what matters. This transformation isn't accidental. It's the result of developing emotional intelligence systematically and practicing it consistently. The fundamental mindset shifts. Throughout this journey, you've been making profound shifts in how you think about emotions, relationships, and yourself. Let's acknowledge these transformations. From reactivity to response, you've learned that there's a space between what happens to you and how you respond. And in that space lies your power. Instead of being controlled by your emotions, you've become curious about them. Instead of being triggered by others' behavior, you've learned to pause and choose your response. This shift alone changes everything. When you stop reacting automatically to life and start responding consciously, you become the author of your own experience. From people-pleasing to authentic connection, you've discovered that trying to make everyone happy is not only impossible, it's actually a barrier to real intimacy. When you show up authentically, with clear boundaries and honest communication, you attract deeper, more satisfying relationships. You've learned that some people won't like the real you, and that's not only okay, it's necessary. The people who matter will appreciate your authenticity, and the people who don't probably weren't meant to be in your inner circle anyway. From fear to curiosity, where you once feared difficult emotions, both your own and others, you've developed curiosity. Instead of, "Why is this happening to me?" you ask, "What is this trying to teach me?" Instead of, "How do I make this feeling go away?" you ask, "What does this emotion need from me?" This curiosity has transformed your relationship with uncertainty, conflict, and even failure. They've become sources of information and growth rather than threats to avoid. From fixed mindset to growth mindset, you've internalized the truth that emotional intelligence isn't a talent you're born with or without. It's a skill you develop through practice. Every difficult conversation is a chance to get better at communication. Every conflict is an opportunity to practice empathy. Every mistake is data for improvement. This mindset means you never have to be stuck. No matter what patterns you've developed, what traumas you've experienced, or what limitations you've believed about yourself, you always have the capacity to grow. The integration process. Learning emotional intelligence concepts is one thing. Integrating them into your daily life is another. Integration happens through consistent practice. You don't become emotionally intelligent by reading about it or thinking about it. You develop it through consistent practice in real situations. Every day gives you opportunities to practice emotional awareness, empathy, self-regulation, and social skills, reflection and adjustment. After challenging interpersonal situations, take time to reflect. What went well? What could you have done differently? What patterns are you noticing? This reflection turns experience into wisdom, community and support. Emotional intelligence develops best in relationship with others. Find people who are also committed to growth, who will give you honest feedback, and who will support you in becoming your best self. Self-compassion during the process. You will make mistakes. You will revert to old patterns sometimes. You will have days when your emotional intelligence feels like it's completely disappeared. This is all part of the process. Treat yourself with the same compassion you would show a good friend who was learning something difficult. The ripple effect. As you've developed your emotional intelligence, you've probably noticed something beautiful happening. Your growth affects everyone around you. When you model emotional regulation, others feel safer to express their own emotions. When you listen with empathy, others feel heard and understood. When you set healthy boundaries, you give others permission to do the same. When you communicate authentically, you create space for deeper connections. This is the ripple effect of emotional intelligence. Your inner work becomes outer healing, not just for you, but for your family, your workplace, your community. Recognizing your progress. Sometimes growth is so gradual that we don't notice how far we've come. Take a moment to acknowledge your progress. You now recognize your emotional triggers before they control your behavior. You can have difficult conversations without attacking or shutting down. You can receive feedback without taking it as a personal assault on your character. You can set boundaries without feeling guilty or selfish. You can be present with others' pain without taking it on as your own. You can influence others through connection rather than control. These aren't small achievements. They're fundamental life skills that will serve you in every relationship and every challenge you face. The path forward. Emotional intelligence isn't a destination, it's a journey. There will always be new layers to discover, new challenges to navigate, new ways to grow. This isn't frustrating, it's exciting. It means you never have to be bored with your own development. As you continue this journey, remember, progress isn't always linear. Some days you'll feel like you're mastering these skills, and other days you'll feel like a beginner. Both experiences are valuable. Every relationship is a teacher. The difficult people in your life aren't obstacles to your growth. They're some of your greatest teachers, showing you exactly where you need to develop stronger skills. Your emotional intelligence serves something larger than yourself. As you become more emotionally skilled, you become a force for healing and connection in a world that desperately needs both. Final summary and empowering action plan. We've reached the end of our journey together, but in many ways, this is just the beginning. You now have a comprehensive toolkit for navigating the complex world of human emotion and connection. But tools are only as powerful as the person who wields them. And that power comes from consistent practice and unwavering commitment to growth. Your emotional intelligence foundation. Let's recap the core competencies you've developed. Self-awareness. You've learned to recognize your emotions as they arise, understand your triggers and patterns, and acknowledge your impact on others. Self-management. You've developed the ability to regulate your emotions, stay calm under pressure, and choose your responses rather than react automatically. Social awareness. You can read emotional cues in others, understand group dynamics, and sense the emotional climate of any situation. Relationship management. You can communicate effectively, resolve conflicts constructively, influence others ethically, and build deep, authentic connections. These 4 pillars support everything else: your resilience in adversity, your ability to lead and inspire others, your capacity for intimate relationships, and your power to create positive change in the world. Your 30-day emotional intelligence practice plan. Knowledge without application is just entertainment. To truly integrate these skills, I'm giving you a practical 30-day plan to deepen your emotional intelligence. Week 1, Self-Awareness Intensive. Days 1 to 3, Emotion Tracking. 3 times a day, pause and ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? What might have triggered this emotion? How is this feeling showing up in my body? Write down your observations. Days 4 to 7, Trigger Mapping. Identify your top 3 emotional triggers. For each trigger, write down what happens, the situation, what you feel, the emotion, what you think, your interpretation, and how you typically react, your behavior. Week 2, Self-Management Mastery. Days 8 to 10, the Pause Practice. Every time you feel triggered this week, take 3 deep breaths before responding. Notice how this simple pause changes your interactions. Days 11 to 14, Emotional Reframing. When you experience difficult emotions, practice reframing them. Anger might be passion, anxiety might be excitement, frustration might be care. How does changing the label change your experience? Week 3, Social Awareness Development. Days 15 to 17, Emotional Detective. In every conversation, pay attention to the other person's emotional state. What are their facial expressions, tone of voice, and body language telling you that their words might not be? Days 18 to 21, Energy Reading. When you enter any room or group, take a moment to sense the emotional climate. Is the energy tense, excited, tired, focused? How does recognizing this help you adjust your approach? Week 4, Relationship Management Integration. Days 22 to 24, Empathetic Response Challenge. In every conversation, make sure you reflect back what you're hearing before sharing your own perspective. Use phrases like, "It sounds like you're feeling," or "What I'm hearing is." Days 25 to 28, Difficult Conversation Practice. Have one challenging conversation you've been avoiding. Use the GRACE framework. Ground yourself. Reflect their experience. Ask powerful questions. Create safety and explore solutions together. Days 29 to 30, Integration and Planning. Reflect on your progress over the past month. What patterns have you noticed? What skills need more development? Create your personal emotional intelligence development plan for the next 3 months. Your ongoing growth practices, daily practices, 5 to 10 minutes, morning emotional check-in. Before starting your day, ask yourself, how am I feeling? What do I need to feel supported today? How do I want to show up in my relationships? Evening reflection. Before bed, review your day. What emotions did I experience? How did I handle challenging situations? What did I learn about myself or others? What do I want to do differently tomorrow? Weekly practices, 30 minutes. Relationship review. Choose one important relationship and reflect. How am I showing up in this relationship? What does this person need from me? How can I be more supportive or understanding? Boundary assessment. Review your boundaries. Where am I giving too much? Where am I not asking for what I need? What boundaries need to be established or reinforced? Monthly practices, 60 minutes. EQ skills assessment. Rate yourself on each of the 4 core competencies. Where have you grown? Where do you need more develop? What specific skills will you focus on next month? Impact evaluation. Consider how your emotional intelligence development is affecting your relationships, work performance, and overall life satisfaction. Celebrate your progress and adjust your approach as needed. Your support system for growth. Emotional intelligence develops best in community. Consider these ways to support your ongoing growth. Find an accountability partner. Someone who is also committed to emotional growth, who can provide honest feedback and encouragement. Join or create a growth-focused group. Whether it's a book club, discussion group, or formal training program, surrounding yourself with others who value emotional intelligence will accelerate your development. Seek professional support when needed. If you discover patterns that feel stuck or trauma that affects your relationships, consider working with a therapist. Become a teacher. One of the best ways to deepen your own understanding is to teach others. Share what you're learning with friends, family, or colleagues. The transformation continues. Here's what I want you to understand. The person you are today is not the person you have to be tomorrow. Every interaction is an opportunity to practice these skills. Every challenge is a chance to grow stronger. Every relationship is a classroom for deeper understanding. You now have the tools to turn conflict into connection, transform criticism into growth, build authentic intimacy in your relationships, lead and influence through empathy and understanding, protect your emotional energy while remaining open to others, bounce back from setbacks with resilience and wisdom. But most importantly, you have the mindset of someone who believes in their capacity to grow, change, and make a positive impact on the world through their emotional intelligence. Your emotional intelligence legacy. As we close this journey together, I want you to think about the legacy you're creating. Not the legacy of your achievements or accomplishments, but the legacy of how you made people feel. The legacy of the connections you built, the conflicts you transformed, the healing you facilitated, and the growth you inspired in others. Maya Angelou said, "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." Your emotional intelligence is your gift to the world. Your ability to make others feel seen, heard, understood, and valued. Every time you choose empathy over judgment, connection over control, curiosity over defensiveness, you're making the world a little more emotionally intelligent. You're modeling what's possible when human beings develop their capacity for understanding and connection. A final message of empowerment. You are not the same person who started reading this book. You've developed skills that will serve you for a lifetime. You've gained insights that will deepen your relationships and expand your influence. You've cultivated wisdom that will help you navigate whatever challenges life brings. But more than that, you've discovered something profound. Emotional intelligence isn't just a skill, it's a superpower. It's the ability to understand the invisible forces that drive human behavior, to connect with others at the deepest level, and to create positive change through the power of authentic relationship. This superpower doesn't make you invincible. You'll still face difficult emotions, challenging relationships, and complex situations. But it makes you resilient, wise, and deeply connected to yourself and others. You now know that emotions aren't weaknesses to overcome. They're information to understand and energy to channel. You know that difficult people aren't obstacles to avoid. They're teachers showing you exactly where you need to grow. You know that conflicts aren't problems to solve. They're opportunities to deepen understanding and strengthen relationships. Most importantly, you know that you have everything you need inside you to handle whatever life brings. You have the capacity to remain calm in storms, to find connection in conflict, and to choose love over fear, curiosity over judgment, and growth over stagnation. The world needs your emotional intelligence. Your family needs it. Your workplace needs it. Your community needs it. And you need it. Not just to survive, but to thrive, to contribute, and to become the fullest expression of who you're meant to be. So go forward with confidence. Practice these skills daily. Share your gifts generously. Continue growing courageously. And remember, every interaction is an opportunity to make the world a little more emotionally intelligent. One conversation, one relationship, one moment at a time. The journey continues, and you're ready for whatever comes next. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Now go out there and change the world with your emotional intelligence. The world is waiting for what you have to offer.